The phantom hitchhiker. The lonely stretch of highway cut through the dense forest like a scar, disappearing into inky blackness as far as the eye could see. Jake gripped the steering wheel tightly, fighting against the heavy pull of exhaustion. He had been driving for hours, desperate to make it home after an unexpectedly long business trip. The clock on the dashboard glowed an eerie 2:37 a.m. Jake blinked hard, trying to focus on the road ahead. His headlights barely penetrated the oppressive darkness. The trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. As Jake rounded a sharp bend, a figure suddenly appeared in his headlights. He slammed on the brakes, tires squealing as the car fishtail-ed. His heart pounding, Jake managed to bring the vehicle to a stop mere inches from the person standing in the road. It was a young woman, dressed in a tattered white dress that seemed to float around her. Her long dark hair obscured most of her face. One pale hand was outstretched, thumb extended in the universal hitchhiker's gesture. Jake's first instinct was to floor it and speed away. Every horror movie he'd ever seen flashed through his mind. But something made him hesitate. The woman looked so lost and vulnerable. And it was such a desolate stretch of road. Who knew how long she had been out here or how far she had to go? Against his better judgment, Jake rolled down the passenger window. "Are you okay?" he called out. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" The woman's head snapped up at the sound of his voice. Jake caught a glimpse of wide, dark eyes before her hair fell forward again, concealing her face. "Please," she said in a soft, raspy voice. "I'm trying to get home. It's not far." Jake hesitated for another long moment before reaching across to unlock the passenger door. "Hop in," he said. "I can take you as far as the next town at least." The woman glided forward and slipped into the passenger seat. Up close, Jake could see how unnaturally pale her skin was, almost translucent in the dim light of the car's interior. She kept her face turned away from him. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've been out here for so long." "What happened?" Jake asked as he put the car in drive and continued down the lonely road. "Did your car break down or something?" The woman was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "There was an accident. So long ago now." A chill ran down Jake's spine. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, suddenly regretting his decision to pick up this strange hitchhiker. "Where exactly am I taking you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just up ahead," the woman replied. "You'll see the turn soon. An old dirt road on the left." Jake nodded, eyes straining to see through the darkness. After a few minutes of tense silence, he spotted a narrow dirt road branching off into the forest. He slowed the car and turned onto it, wincing as branches scraped against the sides of his vehicle. The road wound deeper into the woods, becoming narrower and more overgrown with each passing minute. Jake was about to suggest turning back when they emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated old farmhouse, its windows dark and empty. "This is it," the woman said. "My home." Jake brought the car to a stop, staring at the decrepit building with growing unease. It clearly hadn't been lived in for years. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "This place looks abandoned." But when he turned to look at his passenger, the seat beside him was empty. Jake's blood ran cold. He whipped his head around, searching the car in panic. But there was no sign of the woman. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. With shaking hands, Jake threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the clearing as fast as he dared. His tires kicked up gravel as he fishtail-ed back onto the main road, heart pounding in his chest. As Jake sped away from that lonely stretch of highway, he tried to convince himself that he had imagined the whole thing. The woman, the farmhouse, it must have been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. There was no other explanation. But deep down, Jake knew what he had seen was real. And he couldn't shake the feeling that by giving that phantom hitchhiker a ride, he had brushed up against something dark and hungry that lurked in those woods. Something that might not be finished with him yet. For weeks after that night, Jake was plagued by nightmares of the pale woman in white. In his dreams, he would be driving down that lonely road again, only to look over and see her sitting in the passenger seat. But now her face was fully visible, a rotting, skeletal visage with empty eye sockets that seemed to stare into his soul. He would wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing. During the day, he found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, half expecting to see the ghostly figure standing there. Jake tried to research the area where he had encountered the hitchhiker, looking for any records of accidents or deaths on that stretch of road. But his searches turned up nothing concrete, only vague local legends of a woman in white who haunted the highway, luring unsuspecting drivers to their doom. Just as Jake was starting to think he might be losing his mind, something happened that chilled him to his core. He was cleaning out his car one day when he noticed something tucked under the passenger seat, a small, tarnished locket on a delicate silver chain. With trembling hands, Jake pried open the locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman with long dark hair and sad eyes. Though the picture was old and damaged, Jake recognized her immediately as the hitchhiker he had picked up that night. Jake slammed the locket shut and threw it away, trying to convince himself it was just a coincidence. But he knew in his heart that the phantom hitchhiker had left behind a piece of herself, a tangible reminder that what he experienced was terrifyingly real. From that day forward, Jake avoided driving at night whenever possible. But on those rare occasions when he found himself on a dark, lonely road, he would grip the steering wheel with white knuckles, eyes darting to every shadow. And sometimes, just at the edge of his headlights, he would catch a glimpse of a pale figure in a tattered white dress, hand outstretched, waiting for another ride into the unknown. As the years passed, Jake tried his best to put that terrifying night behind him. He moved to a new city, started a family, and did his best to convince himself it had all been a vivid nightmare. But deep down, he knew the truth. And he lived in constant fear that one day, the phantom hitchhiker would return to claim him. That day finally came on a stormy night, exactly 10 years after Jake's original encounter. He was driving home from a late meeting, the rain lashing against his windshield. As he rounded a bend in the road, his headlights illuminated a familiar figure standing on the shoulder, a woman in a tattered white dress, thumb extended. Jake's blood ran cold. He blinked hard, praying it was just his imagination. But when he opened his eyes, she was still there. And this time, her face was fully visible, the same rotting, skeletal visage from his nightmares. Before Jake could react, the phantom woman was suddenly in the passenger seat beside him. Her bony hand gripped his arm with surprising strength as she turned her empty eye sockets towards him. "I've been waiting for you," she rasped. "It's time to take me home, for good." Jake tried to scream, but no sound came out. He felt the car begin to veer off the road of its own accord, heading for the trees. As the windshield filled with branches, Jake caught one last glimpse of the phantom hitchhiker's ghastly smile before everything went black. The next morning, police found Jake's mangled car wrapped around a tree off a lonely stretch of highway. But of Jake himself, there was no sign. The only clue was a small, tarnished locket found in the passenger seat, the same one Jake had thrown away years before. Some say that on dark, stormy nights, you can still see two figures on that stretch of road, a man and a woman, clothed in tattered white, their thumbs extended as they wait for an unwary driver to pick them up. And those who know the story of Jake and the phantom hitchhiker drive a little faster when they pass by, praying they won't be the next to disappear into the night. As the legend of Jake and the phantom hitchhiker spread, that lonely stretch of highway gained a sinister reputation. Locals warned travelers not to stop for anyone at night, no matter how pitiful they might seem. Some even advocated closing the road entirely. But there were always those who didn't believe the stories, or thought they were somehow immune to the danger. And so the phantom hitchhiker continued to claim new victims, their disappearances adding to the growing mythology of the haunted highway. One such victim was Sarah, a college student driving home for the holidays. She had heard the stories, of course, but dismissed them as silly superstition. So when she saw a bedraggled woman in white standing by the side of the road on a rainy night, Sarah didn't hesitate to offer her a ride. At first, everything seemed normal. The woman gave directions to a house just off the main road. But as they drove deeper into the woods, Sarah began to feel uneasy. The trees seemed to close in around them, branches scraping against the car like skeletal fingers. When they finally reached the dilapidated old farmhouse, Sarah's instincts were screaming at her to flee. But before she could put the car in reverse, she felt an icy hand on her arm. "Thank you for the ride," the woman whispered, her voice suddenly deep and inhuman. "Now you can take my place." Sarah tried to scream, but no sound came out. She watched in horror as her own body began to fade away, becoming translucent and ghostly. In the rearview mirror, She caught a glimpse of her face transforming into a rotting skull before everything went dark. The next morning, Sarah's abandoned car was found on the side of the highway. But of Sarah herself, there was no trace. Only a small locket left behind on the passenger seat, containing a faded photograph of a young woman with sad eyes. Now there are whispers of two phantom hitchhikers haunting that stretch of road, the original woman in white, and a newer ghost matching Sarah's description. Some even claim to have seen Jake's spirit as well, all three of them lined up along the roadside with their thumbs extended. As more disappearances occurred, the legend of the phantom hitchhikers grew. Paranormal investigators and thrill-seekers flocked to the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of the ghosts or uncover the truth behind the hauntings. But those who dug too deeply into the mystery had a habit of vanishing themselves. Camera footage would show them driving down that lonely road at night, only to disappear into thin air. Their vehicles would be found abandoned, with only a small locket left behind as a chilling calling card. Local authorities eventually closed the road at night, citing safety concerns. But even that wasn't enough to stop the phantom hitchhikers. Reports began to surface of the ghosts appearing on other nearby roads, expanding their territory as they searched for new victims. Some theorized that the original accident that claimed the woman in white had torn a hole between worlds, allowing restless spirits to cross over. Others believed it was a curse placed on the land long ago, awakened by the tragic death of the first phantom hitchhiker. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the phantom hitchhikers of that haunted highway would not rest until they had claimed countless more souls to join them in their eternal limbo. And so the legend continues to grow, passed down through generations as a cautionary tale. Never stop for hitchhikers at night, parents warn their children. And if you see a woman in white standing by the road, drive as fast as you can in the other direction. But there will always be those who don't heed the warnings. Those who think they're too smart or too brave to fall victim to some old ghost story. And on dark, lonely nights, the phantom hitchhikers wait patiently by the roadside, thumbs extended, ready to claim another soul for their ever-growing ranks of the damned. So if you find yourself driving down a deserted highway late at night, and you see a figure in white standing by the road, just keep driving. Don't slow down, don't offer a ride. For once the phantom hitchhikers have you in their grasp, there's no telling where that final journey might lead, or if you'll ever return from the other side.